Every day, millions of children head off to school. In the past, school was considered a safe haven, a place where only minor problems like colds and cut knees threatened the well-being of the students and staff. But that has changed. Even a fight between two students carries added dangers. The seriousness of certain diseases carried by blood and other bodily fluids must today be addressed by all educators. As a professional in our educational system, you need to be aware of the potential danger of bloodborne pathogens, the infectious diseases carried by blood and other body fluids. The publicity surrounding the Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, or AIDS, has heightened our awareness. What many people don't realize is that AIDS is not the only bloodborne disease that threatens the human body. The hepatitis B virus, or HBV, infects about 80,000 people a year. The hepatitis C virus, or HCV, infects about 4,000 people a year, and HIV affects about 40,000 people per year. The sad fact is, young people are not immune to bloodborne disease. The Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, has issued a standard that provides various methods to reduce your risk of exposure to bloodborne pathogens. The standard covers workers who can reasonably anticipate contact with blood or other potentially infectious material. Your school system will identify the personnel whose job functions expose them to blood and potentially infectious body fluids. Not every school employee is occupationally exposed to bloodborne pathogens while performing his or her job. However, it is important for everyone in an educational setting to understand the dangers of infection and the safe procedures to minimize risk. This program will provide facts on hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV. Review the OSHA standard for occupational exposure to bloodborne pathogens. Explain how bloodborne diseases are transmitted, and explain how you can protect yourself. Hepatitis means inflammation of the liver. There are several different strains of hepatitis. If you become infected with the hepatitis B virus, or HBV, symptoms can range from flu-like to symptoms so severe you require hospitalization, or you may have no symptoms at all. Unfortunately, many people are unaware that they've been infected with HBV. You can be infected and have no symptoms, yet be contagious and spread the viruses to others. This means school employees can transmit HBV to sexual partners, family members, and even unborn infants. Most people infected with HBV recover and clear the infection. In others, progressive destruction of the liver cells leads to cirrhosis or to cancer and even death. About a third of the people infected with the hepatitis B virus never develop symptoms. For them, the only way to detect HBV is by blood tests. Fortunately, there is a vaccine to protect you against getting HBV. The hepatitis C virus, or HCV, also attacks the liver. Since hepatitis C and hepatitis B have similar symptoms, a blood test is required to tell the difference. HCV has no effective vaccine. Most people infected with HCV show no symptoms of the disease, but 85% will become chronically infected. HIV attacks the body's immune system. The clinical picture of HIV infection differs widely from person to person. A person can be HIV positive and remain in apparently normal health for many years. The infected person becomes seriously ill when the immune system loses its ability to fight infection. Many people who contract HIV will go on to develop AIDS. The number of HIV-infected people who develop serious illness and who die from AIDS has decreased due to the success of recent treatments. Currently, there is no vaccine to prevent HIV infection. To effectively protect yourself against bloodborne disease, you must first understand how you can become infected. As different as the outcomes of bloodborne disease may be, the way it is transmitted in the workplace is essentially the same. HBV, HCV, and HIV may be present in blood and other material, semen, vaginal secretions, and other body fluids that contain visible blood. Bloodborne pathogens can cause infection by entering your body in a variety of ways. Open cuts, nicks, and skin abrasions, even dermatitis and acne can provide an entry for infection. Or infection can enter your body through the mucous membranes of your mouth, eyes, and nose. You can become infected by accidentally injuring yourself with a sharp object that is contaminated. Sharp objects include anything that can pierce, puncture, or cut your skin. Far-fetched? Not at all. Believe it or not, HPV can survive on environmental surfaces, dried and at room temperature, for at least 1 week. As unpleasant and scary as all this might seem, there's no reason to panic or overreact. The key to avoiding infection is first understanding the dangers you face, and second, knowing how to protect yourself. One of the basic problems you face as an adult in a school setting is the natural instinct to help an injured student. The younger the child, the more likely you are to throw caution to the wind and assist. Unfortunately, in today's society, you must consider every person to be a potential bloodborne pathogen carrier. Regardless of age or background, you must take appropriate steps to protect yourself. The OSHA Bloodborne Pathogen Standard requires your employer to create and make available to you an exposure control plan. The ECP will identify the personnel covered by the standard, analyze the potential hazards of each job description, and determine what measures will be taken to reduce the risk of exposure to bloodborne pathogens on the job. The OSHA standard provides various methods to reduce your risk of exposure to bloodborne pathogens. These include engineering controls, employee work practice controls, personal protective equipment, housekeeping, and administration of the hepatitis B vaccine. Keep in mind that none of these approaches is 100% effective, yet used together, they're like having a series of 5 protective barriers or shields, a personal fail-safe system against infection. A common approach to infection control is based on a concept called standard precautions. This approach protects you from exposure to bloodborne pathogens, as well as from exposure to other pathogens that can be found in moist body substances. That's why you must use standard precautions anytime you anticipate contact with human blood, all body fluids, secretions and excretions, non-intact skin, and mucous membranes. The school system will provide physical or mechanical type systems that eliminate hazards at their source. Appropriate puncture-resistant, leak-proof containers should be provided on playing fields and in gymnasiums for disposing of towels soaked with blood or other potentially infected body fluids. The custodian should be responsible for cleaning up body fluid spills using proper decontamination procedures. Whenever you are faced with cleaning up blood or body fluids, always wear the necessary personal protective equipment. Make sure that all equipment and environmental and working surfaces are cleaned and decontaminated after contact with blood or other potentially infectious materials. In addition, remember, never pick up broken glass or other sharp objects with your hands. Always use a broom and dustpan. Make sure you know what engineering controls are available at your school and use them. Work practices are specific procedures you must follow on the job to reduce your exposure to blood and other potentially infectious material. Good work practices help to isolate you from potentially infectious material. Your school's exposure control plan will specifically identify safe procedures for dealing with student injuries. One of the most effective work practice controls is also one of the most basic: wash your hands. In addition to bloodborne pathogens, there are many other types of viral and infectious diseases that can be spread by hand contact. If infectious material does get on your hands, the sooner you wash it off, the less chance you have of becoming infected. Wash carefully and thoroughly. Make sure to use plenty of non-abrasive soap, rinse completely, and dry with a clean towel. If mucous membranes are exposed, flush with water as soon as possible. Proper washing will prevent you from transferring contamination to other parts of your body or the environment. Your school system will provide hand washing facilities in or near your work area. Here are some controls based on personal hygiene that you must also follow. If a student or coworker injury involves blood or other potentially infectious material, you must minimize splashing, spraying, spattering, and generation of droplets. Do not eat, drink, smoke, apply cosmetics or lip balms, or handle contact lenses where there is a reasonable likelihood of occupational exposure to body fluids. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, is your third barrier. Equipment that protects you from contact with blood or other potentially infectious material may include gloves, gowns, aprons, lab coats, face shields, protective eyewear, masks, mouthpieces, resuscitation bags, and other ventilation devices. The type of protective equipment appropriate for your job varies with the task and the degree of exposure you anticipate. In other words, dress for the occasion. Appropriate means, under normal work conditions, protective equipment will prevent blood or other potentially infectious materials from contacting your work clothes, street clothes, undergarments, skin, or mucous membranes. For instance, cotton gloves that absorb liquids are not an appropriate barrier protection against bloodborne pathogens. The school system will provide appropriate personal protective equipment in a location accessible to your work area, such as the custodian's closet or on each hall. In addition, your school system will maintain, replace, and dispose of protective equipment at no cost to you. You and your school system must work together to ensure that your protective equipment does its job. First, you must be trained to use the equipment properly. Second, it must be appropriate for the task. Third, the equipment must fit properly. This is especially important with gloves. And if you are allergic to disposable gloves, your school system will provide an appropriate alternative. Fourth, all equipment must be free of physical flaws that could compromise safety. Finally, you must use appropriate protective equipment each time you perform a task involving potentially infectious material. When any one of these conditions is not fully met, you are at risk. If, when wearing equipment, it becomes penetrated by blood or other infectious material, remove it as soon as possible. Before leaving the work area, remove all protective equipment and place in the designated area or container for washing, decontamination, or disposal. Two types of personal protective equipment deserve special mention. The first is mechanical emergency respiratory devices and pocket masks designed to isolate you from contact with a victim's body fluids. Avoid using unprotected mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. The student or coworker may have blood or other infectious materials in the mouth, or may expel them during resuscitation. Remember, 1 cubic centimeter of hepatitis B virus contaminated blood can contain 100 million infectious particles of HBV. The second type of equipment is gloves, the most widely used and basic form of personal protective equipment. You must wear gloves when it is reasonably anticipated that you may have hand contact with blood, other potentially infectious material, mucous membrane, or non-intact skin. Disposable single-use gloves are used for first aid. Heavy-duty utility gloves are used for housekeeping. Since gloves can be torn or punctured, cover any hand cuts or skin abrasions with bandages before you arrive at school. Replace disposable single-use gloves as soon as possible if they are contaminated, torn, punctured, or no longer offer effective barrier protection. Never wash or decontaminate disposable single-use gloves for reuse. Utility gloves may be decontaminated or reused if they are not cracked, peeling, torn, punctured, and if they otherwise offer barrier protection. Finally, be careful when removing gloves. When both hands are gloved, peel one glove off from top to bottom and hold it in the gloved hand. With the exposed hand, peel the second glove from the top, tucking the first glove inside the second. Dispose of the entire bundle promptly. Never touch the outside of the glove with your bare skin. Gloves should be removed when they become contaminated, damaged, or immediately after finishing the task. Every time you remove your gloves, wash your hands with soap and running water as soon as possible. As we've seen, no barrier is 100% effective, so hand washing after glove removal is critical. One of the best ways to protect yourself from hepatitis B infection is to roll up your sleeve. If your job puts you at risk of exposure to blood and other potentially infectious materials, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommend that you get a hepatitis B vaccine. The vaccines used today are safe and very effective at protecting you from getting hepatitis B. The fifth and final protective barrier is housekeeping. Good housekeeping should be everyone's responsibility. The entire school needs to be aware of the dangers of bloodborne pathogens. Your facility's exposure control plan will list specific methods and regular schedules for cleaning environmental surfaces possibly contaminated with potentially infectious materials. It is suggested that the janitorial staff keep close surveillance of the restrooms in order to control contamination after accidents. Here are some general rules. All equipment and environmental working surfaces must be cleaned and decontaminated with an appropriate disinfectant as soon as possible after contact with blood or other potentially infectious material. Use a broom and dustpan to pick up broken glass, not your hands. Contaminated sharps and other potentially infectious wastes must be placed in labeled or color-coded leak-proof containers that are closable and easily accessible to those who use them. Containers should not be allowed to overfill. Handle contaminated laundry as little as possible and with minimal agitation. Place in labeled or color-coded bags or containers at locations where it is used without sorting or rinsing. Use leak-proof bags to transport wet laundry. Wear gloves and other appropriate personal protective equipment if you work with contaminated laundry. Bins, pails, cans, and similar receptacles that are reused and have a reasonable likelihood for becoming contaminated with blood or other infectious materials shall be inspected and decontaminated on a regularly scheduled basis. The Bloodborne Pathogen Standard has additional provisions to protect you. Even when you play it safe, accidents may happen. If you are exposed, report the incident to your supervisor as soon as possible. If you consent, your employer will provide you with a confidential medical evaluation, blood tests, and follow-up counseling. Even after exposure, treatments are available to help protect you against getting bloodborne diseases. Be on the lookout for fluorescent orange-red labels, red bags, and containers with a biohazard symbol. They warn you when the contents of containers used for waste, storage, or shipping contain blood or other potentially infectious material. Warning labels are also used to designate contaminated equipment. And finally, your school system provides you with a free training program during working hours before you assume a job with occupational exposure and annually thereafter. Protecting yourself from bloodborne diseases on the job requires knowing the facts and taking sensible precautions. By working together with your school system, you can teach and care for students safely and more effectively. So don't take unnecessary risks. As a professional educator backed by the OSHA Bloodborne Pathogens